Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to research and plan for a dungeon by utilizing the two very powerful resources of Puzzle and Dragon X, or Pad Guide. So, basically, like your favorite monsters, the dungeons and bosses we encounter in Puzzle and Dragons are continuously evolving in terms of complexity and difficulty. So no longer are bosses simply just going to tickle you for like 5,000 per hit. Instead, they have a bizarre range of mechanics that you sometimes feel like you need almost like a PhD in pad to decipher. And the goal of this article is going to be helping you walk through one of the dungeons in question. So actually I'm going to be using the one-shot challenge that's presently here, as well as highlighting and mentioning all the tricky or troublesome mechanics and how to best overcome or circumnavigate them. So while things can be complicated, hopefully we can push through and understand what we are facing. So I will plan to do a post maybe next week or so that will teach you how to intelligently build a team to help try and counter the various mechanics in the dungeon. It kind of might supplement this article to a certain extent, but for now this one will mostly address how you basically research a dungeon and then plan accordingly. So the dungeon that I was using as a reference for this will be the one-shot challenge, and I did clear it with my Yomi Dragon team. You can watch this video here or just find it on my YouTube channel. It will kind of go alongside of this, but not necessarily. So as mentioned earlier, we do have access to very powerful resources, Puzzle and Dragon X, or Pad X for short, as well as the mobile app Pad Guide. Both of these will provide you with sufficient information in terms of what the dungeon spawns and what you will encounter, and whichever one you prefer to use will be up to personal preference or what you're just most used to. Neither one is better than the other, and it's just a matter of choosing what works best. So for myself, I tend to use Pad X for dungeon research and then Pad Guide for basically monsters and evolutions, etc. Just because I kind of grew up reading Puzzle and Dragon X, and then Pad Guide I discovered later on. So both of those mediums basically utilize various symbols, and then they have expanded explanations for the dungeon mechanics, and it can be a little overwhelming. So when I'm researching a dungeon and deciding what team to bring and what actives and awakenings and what inherits, I try and spot any crucial mechanics that require usually hard counters, either through like a special active or a particular leader skill to counteract that. So these mechanics include, but are not necessarily limited to, preemptives, most notably very large damaging hits, binds, whether leaders or subs, absorbs or voids, including color or excessive damage, resolves, skill delays, combo shields, orb changers, high health or very high defense bosses, or execution zones, as well as the largest reasonable hit. And I'm going to be explaining all these in a little more detail in a moment. But what I want to emphasize is that some of these mechanics will be conditional, and some of these will only occur if you trigger something you should not. So what you have to watch out for is how conditional are these mechanics? Are they going to happen no matter what you do, such as a preemptive, or will they occur at a certain either turn, like say the boss's third turn, or will it occur at a certain health threshold, and is it possible to avoid them? So for example, a preemptive leader bind cannot be avoided. Like, you'll have to either bring a bind immune leader or some sort of bind clear to overcome those. Conversely, if the leader binds will only occur after, say, the third turn or after you push the boss into a certain threshold, you can technically avoid those. And if that is the case, you should really build your team around the fact that you are going to play it properly, because that way it will allow you to address mechanics that cannot be circumnavigated, that are not as conditional like that. So for example, let's say I'm playing my Yomi Dragon team and there's going to be a preemptive bind. Obviously, if the preemptive bind will be detrimental to my success, I'll need to bring a hard bind clear on either the Yomi Dragons or a sub. But if the binds only occur at a certain percentage, I will not worry about it and just imagine I'm going to one-shot the floor and just proceed as normal. Obviously, if things go wrong, you have to change your plans, but when you are planning, you have to assume you're going to play perfectly, because that will generally give you the highest rate of success, because you'll have more actives to deal with the more unavoidable mechanics. So basically just elaborating on all those dangerous mechanics I just listed beforehand. So preemptives are essentially abilities that will occur as soon as you enter the floor. There's no way to avoid them, and they will happen no matter what you do. So this can actually apply to any mechanic you can imagine, so it could be a preemptive hit for a very large amount of damage. So if that's the case, you need to bring damage mitigation to survive. If it binds, be aware of those. If it absorbs, Is it damage voids? Like, you just have to be aware that preemptives will occur and you cannot avoid them. Now, if you find yourself constantly like reshuffling your team around and you feel like you don't have enough utility to just address like general threats such as like higher health bosses or whatnot, it may be better to rethink your team or just replan, maybe even use a different leader altogether. Because if you find like you're making too many compensations for a dungeon, it may not be the right team to use. So, as mentioned already earlier, binds do have varying degrees of danger in terms of who is bound. Is it your leaders? Is it your subs? Is it conditional or is it unconditional? As well as do you need to have a hard bind clear, or you can get away with a softer bind clear. And by softer bind clear, I mean someone who has a recover bind awakening. So basically you form 6 hearts and you can clear the binds. If you're able to utilize that, it may be a good way to basically save yourself an active skill slot. Absorbs and damage voids, and these are some of the most annoying mechanics in pad, and essentially absorbs can occur either if you are hitting with a particular color, so if there's a light absorb, any damage dealt with light damage will actually heal the boss instead. Conversely, you can have damage absorbs in which you hit too much, it will heal the boss. So example is Sopdet, if you hit above 200,000, it will heal her. Conversely, again, damage voids are basically like an absorb, except if you hit too high, like you basically overshoot the damage threshold, it will void the damage altogether. So an example would be Gaia Dragon in Arena 3. If you hit above 6 million damage, it will deal 0 instead of healing it. So you just have to be aware if it is a void or an absorb, and is it possible to avoid it, or do you need a certain amount of damage control, or to just stall it out. Resolves enable a boss to survive with 1 health for what normally would be a lethal attack, unless they are pushed below a certain health percentage. So generally speaking, most resolves occur around 50%. So that means if the boss is above 50%, you'd actually hit it down to 1 health, and then you'll trigger their 1% ability, which is usually lethal to you. However, if you are able to push the boss below 50%, then kill, it would actually die as normal. So you have to either have some sort of way to overcome these resolves, and this can either be done through, obviously, appropriate damage control, gravities, or having some way to survive that 1% execution ability. So it could be simply bringing a very large shield, or playing a heart cross team, or whatever allows you to survive that execution mechanic. Next are skill delays, and skill delays basically occur when the boss basically adds additional cooldowns to your active skill. So for example, if you had 3 turns before you could use your Yomi Dragon's active and you got skill delayed by 2, you'd actually be back at 5 turns. So this is very dangerous if your whole team gets delayed and you are unable to use actives, and you will just simply die to whatever mechanic comes next. So the easiest way to get past this is use skill delay resist latents, which are, to be fair, the strongest latent you can use on a monster. However, not everyone has easy access to those, and they can simply use skill inheritance like long active skills to act as a buffer. So for example, if you have those late bloomer dragons, they have a 30 turn base cooldown. You can simply inherit a late bloomer dragon onto your card, just make sure it never caps out to that active skill, and you'll have a large degree of skill delay protection, because if you get delayed, you still have your base skill ready. Next are combo shields, and combo shields can be problematic for some teams, whereas other teams don't really care. So basically, combo shields will heal the boss if you deal an insufficient number of combos. Now, leads such as Raw Dragon, who are basically just purely combo based, should not have any trouble with a combo shield because they can fully optimize a board. Whereas a leader like Miru will struggle greatly, especially if they're a row Miru, because they need to make a row of light to deal damage and then a heart cross. So all that space is wasted essentially, and you need to still fit in other combos. So depending on basically how much or how high that combo shield is, you will have to plan accordingly. And if a dungeon has numerous like 6 or 7 plus combo shields, a row Miru team may not be the easiest choice to play through the dungeon, because you might be partially relying on Skyfalls or not having enough damage overall. However, we do have access to combo boosting actives from Khepri, who is a farmable monster, so to a certain extent everyone can at least cheat their way through a combo shield. Next are orb changers, and orb changers basically apply to a boss mechanic when they convert orbs to something else. So it could simply convert your orbs to a different color, or it could convert them to jammers, or worse, poison orbs. And the worst, or I guess best example of this is encountering Beelzebub, who will preemptively spawn an entire board of poison orbs. So you must have some sort of mechanic to deal with it. You basically have to have a full board changer or something that removes poison orbs to deal with them. So that's one thing to keep in mind, like, are the orb changer is going to be problematic to your team? Like, will it cost you an orb changer or a board changer for yourself? And if your team is too orb hungry all the time, this may be problematic. But most notably, you should watch out for Beelzebub spawns, because that always forces an active skill from pretty much every single team. And next is high health or high defense bosses. So basically, when you're studying a dungeon, you should always take a look at what is the highest health encounter in the dungeon, as well as what's about the average or medium health for each encounter, because you need to obviously plan out how much burst you need for the highest health encounter, as well as do you have a feasible amount of damage for the average floor without actually needing an active skill. So for example, if the average encounter has about 3 million health, does your team regularly deal 3 million damage without an orb changer? If the answer is yes, that's probably a safe team to bring, because you won't be forced to use active skills every single turn. On the other hand, if your team struggles to hit 2 million every turn and the boss is 3 million, you may want to rethink about using this team, because you are going to have issues on the majority of the floors. And last but not least, for the dangerous mechanics, are execution zones. So basically, execution zones refers to various health percentages on a boss that will cause you to die. Basically, they will deal too much damage to survive, and even if you bring a shield, you may still die. Great examples are 500% gravities, because even if you have a 75% damage reduction shield, you still die. So you obviously want to look out for these execution zones and how to avoid them. This doesn't necessarily apply to too many different encounters, but it usually is tied in with resolves or very high health bosses who may not be easy to one-shot. So you just need to make sure, basically, can you get around these execution zones. And I guess as a small extension to execution zones are, what is the largest reasonable hit and whether or not you can survive it. So for example, if there is an attack for 30,000 and your team has at least 30,000 health, you can survive what is the most reasonable normal hit. And that means you may not have to compensate or change your team composition. That also applies to the largest preemptive in the dungeon. Can you survive the largest preemptive without an active skill? Because if that's the case, it definitely saves yourself team building constraints. Now, obviously, when the hit's like 80,000, that's not a reasonable hit. That's usually more towards the line of execution zones for the average team. So obviously, just try and find what is a reasonable hit and can you survive it. So like generally speaking, if you have like 30-odd thousand health, you can survive most normal attacks in the dungeon. So as I mentioned earlier, I did play through One Shot Challenge 9, and I will be showing in this article basically how I planned out the dungeon in terms of what were I thought the more problematic or troublesome spawns, and how my team building compensated for it. So my Yomi Dragon team hits around 6 to 7 million damage with basically a single 5-orb 1 enhance, provided all the orbs are enhanced, as well as some like combos alongside of it. So for the most part, I am able to kill the majority of the floors without any active skill intervention. However, on the floors of, say, 12 million health, which is some of the higher ones out there, I would basically just require the 5-orb 1 enhance and 3 other dark orbs to kill it. So I just know my damage output and how many orbs I need to overcome them, and basically this allows me to conserve active skills. Now, not every team has as high damage output as Yomi Dragon, so you may have to adjust accordingly. And these are the notable spawns that I felt were worth mentioning and how you should overcome them. I try and make it so you kind of apply that knowledge to the general team overall. But my Yomi Dragon team basically is Anaphon for stat transfer. I had Carrot on Oku, mostly because of skill delay protection, as well as a giant burst if needed, Haku on Haku for stats, and then Akachi on my friend Yomi Dragon because it's basically the best active skill for this team. So, notable spawns. It may be a little challenging to see it here. It might be easier on my article, or just simply visit Puzzling Dragon X to take a look. I just link it up here. But Hell is one of the first encounters you to find in the dungeon. She's on floor 5, and she has a 21,407 preemptive. So make sure you obviously have enough health before entering her floor. It's good to be aware of that, as well as knowing that it's not really ideal to dance around with her just because she has very dangerous mechanics, and it's best to just one-shot her. Like I said, if you can avoid all those lethal mechanics, it's best to go for the kill. And that's why I don't necessarily like examine every single ability because, well, if you can kill her, that's the best thing to do. Right after Hell are the Sonya Tamadras, and the Sonya Tamadras basically have 3 different sets, and they all do dangerous things. But the green one will hit you for 45,000 on the first turn. Blue one is annoying, hits for about 14,000. Red one hits for 13 or 14,000. So you ideally want to kill at least the green one off, and then you'll probably kill the blue one off as well. And if you fail to make the combo shield, you can at least kind of dance around on the red one. However, you just want to kill these Tamadras right away. You really don't want to leave the green one alive unless you want to have a really tough time. Next is Agni, and Agni is on floor 7, so it's just a lot of wonderful spawns back to back. And Agni will put you in a certain degree of agony if you fail to kill him right away. For the most part, the first turn will delay your skills and then spawn a column of fire, and then it just gets messy until he starts voiding damage for 10 turns, and then it becomes a nightmare to try and survive because then you have 2 columns of fire. So for the most part, you should try and kill him in one go, while overcoming the 6 combo shield. So make sure you have adequate damage to kill his 10 million health, as well as the ability to hit those 6 combos on a reliable basis. Right after is Sha Wu Jing, and Sha Wu Jing is quite a dangerous spawn for teams without damage control, and those who, because you will essentially trigger his 1% resolve because he has only 1.2 million health, and you will die. So the ways to get around it is obviously bring a team of damage control to push him under 75% resolve, or you bring a delay, poison, or a big enough shield to tank that execution hit. All 4 of those options are viable, so just make sure you have at least one of those at your disposal. Next is Il-6, and Il-6 is probably the hardest encounter in this dungeon in my opinion, because he combines both a 30% resolve and a very dangerous skill set that hits incredibly hard. Essentially, if he's above 30% health, he will hit for up to 38,000 damage every single turn, and if you one-shot him and thus trigger the resolve, he will simply resurrect to 50% health and hit you for 22,000 damage or so. So now becomes a struggle of getting him into that resolve zone because you have to control your damage while healing up and surviving those gigantic hits. And that can be problematic for many teams. For my Yomi Dragon team, I knew that I needed 5 or 1 enhance and 4 to 5 combos, so I was able to hit that and push him into the resolve zone right away. Once you push Il-6 into that resolve zone, he will change your board to locked jammers, hearts, and water orbs. So that also comes with a 27,000 hit. So you're going to be at low health, and you have to try and kill him right away because if you don't, he hits you for 136,000 damage. So unless you are playing a Heart Cross team of a big shield, or you bring a big shield active skill, you are going to die. So you need to kill him right away when this frenzy zone happens. However, to make this situation even more problematic, there's actually a preemptive on the next floor for 14,500, so you have to kill him while healing, which means you cannot bring a Heartbreaker. So for my Yomi Dragon team, what I did was I actually popped Haku, then Akachi to give myself at least 5 enhanced Dark Orbs, as well as at least 3 Heart Orbs to heal up and survive the preemptive on the next floor. Basically, you could dance around it with a big shield, like my Mantastic account. I tried a different strategy. I just simply popped Indra Shield, healed up to full, tanked the big hit, and then killed it on the next floor after I removed all the jammers and whatnot. Later on floor 16 is the Tan floor, and the Tans are actually quite scary. There are 4 of them that appear, and each one will hit for about 11,000 and change. So about 45,000 damage for the 4 of them, and they all have 3.5 million defense. You should ideally kill them right away, because unless your team can survive a 45,000 hit, you're going to have a bad time. Immediately after the Tans is Shiva, and Shiva is generally a very dangerous spawn for teams who do not have skill delay resists, because he will preemptively delay all your skills by 2 turns, as well as cut your health by 75%. In addition, all his attacks deal very large amounts of damage, so unless you have some sort of way to protect your active skills or a nice board, you are probably going to die to Shiva, so just be aware of that and have at least some sort of active skill at the ready if your board is not desirable. And then next, at least for me, was Volsung. And Volsung is relatively straightforward, as his first form simply has a combo shield, which is not hard to overcome, and his final form has a 54% resolve. Now, this final form would normally be very scary, however, we can delay and poison him. So If you delay or poison him, that resolve has no effect, and he's just a simple matter of killing that 14 million health. So what I did was simply delay him with my Oku, and he just fell over on the second turn because I pinged him for 1 damage. If you poison him, he will die right away because you one-shot him, and then he's left with 1 health. The poison triggers, and he dies. If you don't have a delay or a poison, you are probably going to have a bad time because he hits for 770,000. Like, it's not a good thing to happen. So you just simply want to have a delay or poison, and that's the easiest way to counter Volsong. On the other hand, if you fight against Lynthia, she has a 5-turn Awoken Skillbind, and you can counter that either through a long delay, or using Green Odin, or you can have just a giant amount of burst and punch through. It may be hard without Awoken skills, but it is doable for some teams. And last but not least is Gainot. And Gainot basically just has a very large amount of health and really no mechanics to deal around. So if you get him, just a matter of bursting high enough. I think he has maybe like 19 million health. I could be mistaken, but just hit hard enough. So in conclusion, like, this is how I basically look at a dungeon, how I tackle it. Like, I examine where all the problematic spawns are, and can my team counter them without making too much accommodations. While Il-6 was a challenge, I felt that the Haku-Akashi combo was sufficient enough to deal with him, and it actually was. So let me know how you prepare for the dungeons, as well as what you used for Challenge 9, or the one-shot Challenge 9. Let me know in the comments below. Hopefully you all have a mantastic day, and happy puzzling!